And we're live.
Good evening. Welcome to our Ordinary Council meeting, 15th of August 2023. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this Ordinary Council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or make a submission will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of that live stream and recording. The chair and or the CEO have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination of or interruption of the live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed appropriate. That may include where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. The live stream will stop prior to the closed section of the meeting and will recommence for the conclusion of the meeting. The public is able to view this live stream via our website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent the continuation of the live stream, the meeting will continue as long as the quorum can be maintained, and where possible, a recording of the meeting will be published on the council's website. Where a quorum cannot be maintained, the meeting will be adjourned until the issue is resolved or the meeting postponed to another time and date in accordance with council's governance rules. Please stand for the opening prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberation to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. We acknowledge the people, past and present, of the Wadawurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung, Eastern Maar and Watchabollock tribes whose lands form the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respects to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of these tribes whose lands we meet on today. I also acknowledge the people of the Kalkadoon Nation whose land I'm meeting on today. We're all present, so no apologies. Any notices of disclosure of interest by councillors or office bearers?
Item 13.2.1, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, item 13.3.2, thanks, Mr Mayor.
13.3.2, thank you. Confirmation of previous minutes. The minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on 18th of July 2023, as previously circulated to councillors, be confirmed. Moved, Councillor Keogh, seconded, Councillor Ferrari. All those in favour? Carried. Is there any business arising? None, thank you. Public participation. Members of the community are encouraged to participate in public ordinary council meetings by asking questions or presenting a submission. This can be done by attending in person or by submitting in writing prior to 12 noon on the day of the meeting, online through council's website, by mail or hand delivered. If a question or submission is submitted in writing, this will be read by the chair during public participation, stating the person's name and township. Question time will be held first, followed by public submissions. 30 minutes is allowed for the total period of public participation. Time extensions may be allowed at the discretion of the chair, subject to the provisions of the governance rules. A person may ask a maximum of 2 questions at any one meeting. The chair will allocate a maximum of 5 minutes for each person who wishes to address council or ask questions. The chair, councillor or council officer to whom a question is referred may immediately answer the question or take the question on notice for answering at a later date. There will be no discussion or debate with the public attendee. However, councillors may ask questions of the attendee for clarification. Are there anyone in the gallery who would like to ask a question? Or anyone in the gallery who would like to make a submission?
That's a no, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Item 10, Corporate and Community Services, Flood Recovery Update, has been presented to us, councillors, and taken as read. Can we move?
Happy to move, Mr Chair.
Move Councillor Vance, seconded Councillor Keogh. Councillor Vance, would you like to?
No, it's just
Councillor Clark?
Mr Mayor, just two things. Firstly, to thank the staff for the removal of the footbridge in Lexington. And nice to see that on a low loader heading out of town. And that'll be a relief to the community locally. And also a thank you for the number of areas we've got done. I said we've got the ceiling works done. They're just creating a little bit of, I think, concern in the community as they see us patch one piece and not another. But as we keep trying to explain to them, that is the system we're working with in terms of flood recovery money. This bit's covered, that bit's not. But we'll just continue to keep telling our 7,000 residents that as we go every time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Any other discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. Customer action requests, again, taken as read. Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Ferrari. Any discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. And, excuse me. Item 11, councillor activity reports. All nominated as usual. Item 12, assembly.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, Mr. Mayor, you had a mover here.
Sorry, move Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Keogh. All those in favour? Carried. Assembly of Councillors for July 2023. Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Ferrari. All those in favour? Carried. And item 13. Asset and Development Services. Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report seeks to provide council with CO2 emission data relating to the consumption of utilities in the previous 12-month period to provide a benchmark in council's pathway to reduce emissions. A report commissioned by council showed that most of council's CO2 emissions are associated with fleet, plant, and council buildings. In 2021, council adopted the Climate Change Response and Mitigation Plan. A significant number of sustainability projects were undertaken to reduce council's CO2 emissions, including solar panel installations, LED streetlight implementation, signing up to 100% green power, and auditing and retrofitting of 8 council buildings. The conversion to 100% green power automatically reduced council CO2 emissions by approximately 25%. In 2022, council implemented CO2 monitoring software Trellis. The system is used to collect, interpret, and act on data, providing an accurate corporate carbon footprint and a measured baseline to commence council's journey to reduce carbon emissions. The first step in council's journey to net zero is to have an accurate measure of the existing carbon footprint to be able to identify where improvements can be made. The implementation of the Trellis software data has allowed council to move into the measure stage of the journey. Monitoring each site and asset class within council's control helps to identify how various energy sources are used, which can assist in identifying improvements. The software provides graphs for each site. A few examples are provided in this report, and the data captured will also highlight any anomalies to be identified. Spikes in certain areas will assist council officers to conduct investigations and identify areas requiring repair or upgrade. At the Lawrence Street office, the current electricity use comparison for the Beaufort Shire office from July last year to June of this year shows a small reduction in costs from the previous year. The graph also shows at what times of year council is using more electricity, which may relate to the higher generation of electricity from solar during the sunnier parts of the year, and may also relate to the fact that heating of the office requires more energy. Based on the floor space and number of people that work in the Lawrence Street office, the cost is reasonably low due to recent initiatives such as light upgrades, improvements to insulation and heating, and cooling system upgrades. As a comparison, the data presented for the Beaufort Lake Caravan Park shows that energy consumption and CO2 emissions highlights some areas for improvement to reduce costs and CO2 emissions, such as better insulated cabins, creating less reliance on heating and cooling mechanisms, and improved lighting. We've also shown in the report that the Pyrenees Shire fleet transport fuel costs are currently being measured at the total cost of just over $300,000, which relates to 577 tonnes of CO2 emissions. This is an area that we need to address. A comparison of transport fuel data will be available in the next financial year. Council officers will continue to measure and track emissions data across the areas of electricity consumption and fuel costs, and provide updated comparisons to council on a regular basis. The next step in the data capturing of CO2 emissions is to transfer actual costs into other areas from the previous financial year into equivalent carbon emissions. Council has shown through the various CO2 reduction programs that it is committed to climate action. Council continues to support the community regarding the impacts of climate change by promoting actions that are replicable. The implementation of the Trellis software is a big step on the pathway to CO2 emissions reduction. The accurate measuring of data allows council to assess the current costs and emissions of the organisation's operations. And it's the officer recommendation that council notes this report and that council commits to further reports being presented once more data has been collected.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Keogh. Any discussion, councillors? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the first time we've had such a report, and it's very important in the narrative of what council's doing in that sense. And I think the Lawrence Street story, as Mr. Gowans has relayed, is a good one for us to use now across other parts of the organisation. We certainly want to set an example as council, and I think our whole Shire picture is actually a very strong one. We have over 300 wind turbines. We're probably the second most amount of renewable energy of any municipality in the state. So we're making our contribution at a state scale. It's for council to continue to make its contribution, and through that to help the community as the next step in terms of their contribution to move towards reducing their carbon footprint and making this. And as I said, I think council can show that both this can be done and it can also be done affordably. So I commend council for the work.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Keogh?
Sorry, just to clarify, that was Councillor Vance who seconded that, not me. I know it's hard to see. Thank you. Just a motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vance.
I realise you're far away, so you probably couldn't recognise me. I just want to reiterate Councillor Clark's comments, and for one that's come from a different scene growing up, I had difficulty wondering how we could measure these emissions and coming to grips with the whole deal, but it's good to see that we've got some definite evidence before us now, and it is able to be measured, even though one still has difficulty coming to grips with the fact that we've put 370 odd tonnes of carbon back into the atmosphere through the vehicles that we've been driving around. It's all hard for an old fellow to comprehend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. As a Shire, I think we pull our weight quite handsomely in these sorts of matters. And I would suggest to anybody who may be listening that there are many avenues out there for people to take these measures in their own homes. Solar panels, solar batteries are readily available. They have financing arrangements that people may be able to take into consideration. And I think they should inform themselves of what these are so that they can look into it as a part of our future as a shire. Thank you, councillors. All those in favour? Carried. Corporate and Community Services, renaming Landsborough Road to Aramant Road between Ararat, St Arnaud Road and Stall Avoca Road. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council's adoption of a unique name for a road that's currently got a duplicate name. There's 2 Landsborough roads in Landsborough, and it's proposed to rename the shorter of those roads, which is totally within the Shire. It services around 20 properties, most of which are non-residential. And this section of road is in an area that is not included in any current traditional owners' area of interest. The duplicated road name was identified through a road name auditing process, and council formally resolved to rectify this by seeking an alternative name. Public consultation sought alternative names, and the only response received was related to an original resident, an early settler of the area who was named Amaranth. There are still members of the descendants of that family in the area, and it's proposed to use the sort of more anglified name of the version of the name, which was spelt in many different ways over the years. Some historical research was provided in evidence of the request to name it Amaranth Road, which gave us quite a good history of the settlement there. Following that proposal, a second letter containing the suggested name was sent to all landholders, offering them the opportunity to object to the proposed name, and following the statutory consultation period, no objections were received. And the name does reflect one of the earlier multicultural examples of people moving into and contributing to the development of the Pyrenees area. It is now, therefore, the officer's recommendation that council adopts Amaranth Road as the road name for the road currently known as Landsborough Road between Ararat, St Arnaud Road and Stall Avoca Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Moved Councillor Keogh, seconded Councillor Clark. Any discussion, councillors?
No, just to say, Mr Mayor, it makes good sense to be able to use that word, that name for that road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. All those in favour? Carry. Can we invite Councillor Vance back? Health, Safety and Wellbeing Policy, Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report seeks council adoption of the revised Health, Safety and Wellbeing Policy for 2023. Council has an obligation under the OHS legislation to maintain a safe workplace, and as part of the activities to meet this obligation, council maintains a policy that articulates the intention of the council in this regard. Council's existing policy was due for review in 2023, and that review has indicated that in the main the policy is still valid and up to date, with some minor changes being made to maintain its currency with legislation obligations. Adoption of the updated policy is now requested by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we have a motion. Councillor Keogh moved, seconded councillor Ferrari. Councillor Keogh.
Again, only just, it's a great policy if it's been able to have little changes to be able to be renewed, but that it is an important one. So obviously very important that it is renewed. So thank you for doing that, Kathy and team.
Any other discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. Council plan progress update. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report provides council with an end of year progress report on actions planned to, or actions delivered as part of the strategic goals and priorities identified in the council plan for the last financial year. Work continues to progress implementing the multi-year operational initiatives designed to support the delivery of the council plan, ensuring that this remains foremost in the minds of all officers and business units. At the end of June 2023, the council plan is at its mid-term point of delivery. The attached report provides a progress update against the plan, and of the 66 priority actions detailed in the council plan, 60 or 91% have commenced. And I'll talk a little bit about the 6 priority actions which haven't commenced shortly. I'll take the rest of the report, the detailed bits of the report as being read, and of course the attachment which gives the full progress report as being read. There are some recommendations for change in the priorities. 2 main recommendations for change. In priority 1, which is people, measure 3, which is participation in active ageing social support programs. The target there, this is in the measures, target is to maintain a minimum of 86 participants. With council's exit from funded aged care programs as of the 1st of July, it's recommended that this measure be discontinued and that a new measure be implemented around active ageing when the new programme is developed and adopted during 23-24. The other recommendation for change is for priority 2, which is place, measure 3, the number of townships with framework plans. The target to increase is to increase by 1 each year. It has generally been stated by our communities that more work should be done on the implementation of plans rather than just more planning. And the current focus in this area over the past 12 months has been to implement the framework plans already completed, which does meet this community expectation. It is therefore requested that this measure be changed to reflect the number of implementation actions commenced or completed, rather than the number of framework plans additionally done. There are 6, as I mentioned before, there's 6 priority actions that have not yet commenced in this reporting year. These include 4 priorities which are identified as needing funding to progress, which at this midway point in the plan has not materialised. It's considered that if it hasn't materialised by now, that funding for this type of work is unlikely to be available during the balance of the current council term, and therefore the additional following changes are recommended. In priority 1, people, priority 2, improve accessibility and inclusivity and develop a diversity and inclusion strategy. It's unlikely that funding will be available for this type of activity over the balance of the term. And as this is an additional task for council officers without such funding, it's recommended that this priority be discontinued and removed from the council plan. The next one is also in the priority 1, people. It's item 9, which is to develop an accessibility strategy. Again, it's unlikely that funding will be available for this type of activity over the balance of the council term. However, council officers consider that this is of sufficient importance to the community that it's recommended to continue with this priority and convene an internal working party during 23-24 to determine what can be achieved within existing budget parameters regarding accessibility and inclusion. Therefore, it is recommended that that one be removed. The next one is priority 2, which is place. Item 2, identify priorities and seek support to identify, preserve and protect heritage assets. once again, it's unlikely that funding will be available for this type of activity over the balance of the council term, and it's recommended that this priority be discontinued other than the support provided already through community grants and therefore removed from the council plan. The support provided through community grants is something that is an ongoing activity and doesn't need to be a priority. The fourth one is, again in place, item 10, adopt and apply principles around sustainable growth and development within townships. This requires project funding to develop and deliver policy and scheme incorporation. It's unlikely that funding will be available for this type of activity, and there is so much strategic planning work already underway that there remains insufficient capacity for council officers to deliver this priority. And it is recommended, therefore, that this priority be discontinued and considered for re-inclusion within the council plan development for the next council term. It is the officer's recommendation, therefore, that council considers and accepts the end of year council plan progress report as of 30th of June 2023, seeks to report back to the community members that participated in the deliberative engagement to inform the community vision, and seek to hold an appropriate event with the community members to discuss the implementation progress, as this is a mid-term point, and considers and approves the recommendations for change as follows: to discontinue the measure participation in active ageing social support programmes during 2023-24, to consider inclusion of a new measure around participation of the community in active ageing programmes, which to be developed, to change the measure number of townships with framework plans to the number of framework plan implementation activities commenced, with the target number to be determined, to discontinue and remove from the council plan the item 8, develop a diversity and inclusion strategy due to funding and capacity unavailability, to discontinue and remove from the council plan the identification of priorities and seek support to identify, preserve and protect heritage assets, again due to funding and capacity unavailability, to discontinue and remove from the council plan the priority around adopting and applying principles on sustainable growth and development within townships due to funding and capacity unavailability. Sorry. Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we have a motion before us. Do I have a mover? Moved Councillor Ferrari, seconded Councillor Clark. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just got a couple of questions in relation to some of the statuses. I note that there's three, item 3 and number 3 in enabling principles, measure community satisfaction with community consultation and engagement. Target maintained at 55% or above, the score is 50%. Place, the measure, number 2, community satisfaction with appearance of public areas, maintain at least 70%, 65%. And in that same table, number 4, community satisfaction with recreational facilities, maintain at 69%, and it's at 65%. I guess just what I'm seeking, and perhaps you may not be able to answer it all tonight, but these measures are really significant as they relate directly to the community's experience or perceptions of the council in those areas, and it's gauged through a survey. Can I ask, what are we doing? I note there's no statuses in those in relation to a reply about what we're doing about it. So I just ask, what's being done to identify what the actual issues are that lead to those results, and what are we doing to improve those results and engage with the community? And they must, if we talk about priorities, they must sit at the highest level, or I consider to be at the highest level of our priorities, because that's what the community is directly telling us, and it's directly what they're responding to when they're asked about it from an independent review. I just noticed that there was no strategies mentioned in the status. So can I just ask what we're doing to try and address those three very, very important issues for the community, please?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Ferrari. We are putting together a strategy we realise that our community satisfaction scores have been dropping now for a few years, and we are devising a strategy that will try and lift those scores over the next few years. And I think we did discuss this leading up to this, the outcomes of this community satisfaction survey. So the numbers and the drop in numbers wasn't unexpected to us this year, but it is hoped over the next few years that we will rise it. So we'll bring, I can't give you the exact details of everything that we're intending to do at this moment in time, but I think we could bring a report back to council on that in the future, near future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a good report for community to have a look at because it gets a bit of a sense of the diversity of what council does, but it still doesn't cover things like our environmental health officer checking every food business in the town, what our environmental development and tourism people do. Doesn't talk about drains, doesn't talk much about bridges, which are all part of our key things. So it gets a sense of the diversity of what we do, but it doesn't still cover everything in that sense of things. I think it's important that we actually use these reports to certainly help to communicate to our community about the diversity of stuff that council has on its plate in the sense of those things. I look forward to the next reports.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I totally agree. It does give a broad brush of what we are required to do. Any other discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. And membership, Rail Freight Alliance, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the purpose of this report is for council to consider whether to continue membership with the Rail Freight Alliance. And Mr. Mayor, just to provide context of this, council decided at the last council meeting to systematically review its various memberships that it's involved in. And essentially this is on the basis of reevaluating the benefits and the costs associated with those memberships. And in a financially constrained environment, it's really important for council just to consider how it spends the limited funds that it has, and just to ensure that that's good investment for the Pyrenees Shire and our communities. And you know, in a similar way to which we've just discussed the council plan progress implementation and the satisfaction of the community with the level of service that council provides, much of that is directly related to budget and the availability of expenditure to be able to spend on these items. So in this case, the Rail Freight Alliance is under discussion, and the report that you have in front of you, councillors, provides some background to the Alliance. The fact that the Alliance has been established since 1997, it's an alliance of councils across Victoria, metropolitan and rural councils, has a long track record of advocating strongly to government and getting government's attention to invest in rail. And specifically in respect of this alliance, it's about rail freight. So it's about getting more freight onto rail and less on trucks. Trucks are what come through our towns and they impact on the amenity of our townships, they damage roads. And having a rail network that's able to be used for freight and create more freight efficiency in the transportation of product is what initiated this group to be established. And since its establishment, there's been a significant amount of investment by subsequent governments. And some of that investment includes 800 million investment in the Murray Basin Rail Project, which directly impacts on the Pyrenees Shire. 30 million in mode shift incentive scheme, 181 million in capital upgrade program, the Port of Rail Transformation Project, 130 million in passenger rail separation from freight rail project as well. So there has been significant investment. The RFA has actively advocated government for that investment and over many years. And the advocacy is also evident in the range of submissions, formal submissions made by the RFA to government over many years. Mr. Mayor, there's a copy of the rail freight map of Victoria within the report, and one of the observations from that is the fact that there's still a long way to go to achieve one of the objectives of the Alliance, and that was rail standardisation of key rail lines in Victoria, where currently the state comprises both broad and standard gauge rail. Mr. Mayor, while the work of RFA advocating on the matter of rail freight is ongoing, the matter of passenger rail is also a significant issue for the Pyrenees, particularly to ensure connectivity of our community, particularly to the centre of Melbourne. And that's a significant issue for council, and whilst rail freight is an issue ongoing, the advocacy around passenger rail is something that council will also need to consider, and that's outside the current charter of the Rail Freight Alliance. Whilst there's an ongoing benefit to Pyrenees in maintaining membership with the Rail Freight Alliance, for reasons outlined above, then there's still much more investment to occur. The issue for Pyrenees to consider, however, is whether this warrants the financial membership ongoing, given that the matter of rail freight is the responsibility of government, essentially. Council's membership is current for the 23-24 financial year. However, it's suggested that council consider giving notice to the Rail Freight Alliance of intention not to continue with membership beyond the 30th of June 2024 in the context of council's tight financial constraints. And Mr. Mayor, there's a recommendation to that effect in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we have a motion before us. Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, when I saw this report, I was a bit troubled by it. And I thought we're not done. We're seriously not done in terms of what we need to do with rail. And then the second thought was are we actually giving up? And in some extents, I think they're both true in the sense of where we're at. There's so much still to be done in the rail thing that will benefit Pyrenees Shire. You know, if you think about the Maryborough-Ararat line that's still only going at 40 kilometres an hour, you think about the fact that when you get that grain of Ararat, you then can't get it from Maroona to Portland because it's only got 19-tonne axle loading instead of our 23. So some of the dream about this, I think, is still there, and we think that's still really important. But I think this is just unfortunately, a really practical decision because there's no commitment from government to deliver on this stuff. And that's, I think, our challenge. Mr. CEO, you were much more polite than me in the way you framed that, but I just don't think, I don't see in my basic commitment from government to get trucks off roads and get our rural rail dealt with. And I think, unfortunately, you know, we can use that money. We need to use that money in our community for a little while. So I'll support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Vance?
No, happy.
No. Any other councillor? All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will depart.
Membership Municipal Association of Victoria, Mr. Nolan.
Mr. Mayor, just continuing on the theme of memberships, membership with the MAV cost council in the order of $22,506 a year to be a member of the MAV. And the purpose of this report is to identify for councillors some of the benefits associated with membership for council to consider whether or not to continue with that membership. At the moment, the MAV comprises 79 councils in Victoria as members, and that hasn't always been the case. The MAV's role, principally, is to represent and advocate local government interests, promote the role of local government, to build the capacity of councils, to facilitate effective networks, to provide policy and strategic advice, to support councillors, and to provide insurance and procurement services. The MAV has a set of rules which were reviewed in 2022, and a strategic plan which council has been provided with a copy of. The MAV has a chief executive that leads a skilled organisation, provides services to members of the board who are elected representatives from the community, and Councillor Clark, who has declared an interest tonight. This item is currently the president of the MAV. The work of the MAV is well documented, and it's summarised in the 2022 member benefits report. Each year, the MAV provides council with a report on the benefits and the activities of the MAV to enable council to understand whether, in fact, you're getting value for money. That report, which is contained in the agenda, lists a range of those services that are provided. Provides a national voice through linkage with ALGA, which it has representation at a federal level, stakeholder engagement, policy and advocacy, sector representation, government support, councillor development, councillor acknowledgement, emergency management, MAV procurement, conferences and events, sector-wide communications. So there's a range of those services and benefits that are outlined in the report. And Mr. Mayor, without going through all of that detail, it's there for you to read. And there is a recommendation there that council notes the benefits of membership with the MAV and continues its membership with the Municipal Association of Victoria, given the extent of work that the MAV undertakes and the cost that would incur Pyrenees if we were to undertake that work as an organisation without member association.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Moved Councillor Keogh, seconded Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Keogh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, again, as Mr. Nolan summed up, the costs that it would cost us to not be a member would far outweigh the benefits that we get from the MAV. So very happy to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, Pyrenees is a small rural council, and as such, our voice isn't as strong or as well heard individually as it is through the MAV, who represents a collective of councils, if not them all, across the state. And it's simply strength in numbers, and they do so much work, even behind the scenes for the councils that, especially somewhere like Pyrenees, we simply haven't got the money or the capacity to do a lot of that work. So it's vitally important that we stay in that membership at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Any other councillors? I'd like to comment that the vast majority of information that comes to me from an outside source, outside council, generally comes from MAV. And I find it very enlightening a lot of the time. So I'm very happy to stay with them as a member. All those in favour? Carried. Membership, Western Highway Action Committee. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to consider continuation of membership with the Western Highway Action Committee. And Mr. Mayor, I've provided a report there that outlines the objectives of the committee, which are essentially about advocacy to government on matters relating to the Western Highway, which is a critical access road for members of our community. So the objectives are listed there. I won't read them all, Mr. Mayor. And the committee has been in operation for quite a number of years, since early 2000, and has had great access to political parties on both sides in advocating to them about upgrades and improvements to the Western Highway. Council receives lots of contact from members of the community about the Western Highway. Right at the moment, the condition of some of the pavement is less than what meets communities' expectations, and council and the WAC group actually advocate strongly for that to occur. More often than not, the committee is advocating for major upgrade works. And if you're thinking about Western Highway, if you're a member of the community that lives in Beaufort and surrounds the Beaufort bypass is one of those major projects, and having the Western Highway Action Committee supporting council in its efforts to advocate for the best possible outcomes associated with the bypass of Beaufort is something that is really valuable when getting in the ear of decision makers. And further to that, further improvements on the Western Highway to provide efficient links into Melbourne are important, and the congestion around Melton to Caroline Springs is currently an issue. The speed restriction area around the Ballarat bypass area is currently an issue. And then further to the west, there are a range of issues as well in terms of completing the duplication effort on the Western Highway to Stawell. Mr. Mayor, I'll just sort of remind councillors about the important role that the committee played in advocating to government for the duplication of the highway from Ballarat to Beaufort. It was the first stage of 3 stages of duplication from Ballarat to Stawell, and the committee was instrumental in doing the strategic work necessary to highlight the benefits and the business case associated with that significant government investment in that duplication, and the significant benefits that have come and will come for many years into the future for Pyrenees Shire and the members of our community. Mr. Mayor, just from a financial perspective, currently there is no membership fee. There is representation on the committee, but essentially the secretariat for the committee is provided by the City of Horsham, and there is no charge to members for that. So there is a lot of good reasons to continue to be a member of the Western Highway Action Committee, and not too many to withdraw. So the recommendation, Mr. Mayor, is that Council, having considered the importance of the Western Highway to our communities and the extent of improvement work still needed, continues its membership of the Western Highway Action Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Moved Councillor Ferrari, seconded Councillor Vance. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly agree with Mr. Nolan, the recommendation that we need to stay in this committee. And just for the benefit of the audience, it represents the highway from the South Australian border right through to the edge of Melton. I think that's right, Mr. Gowns. And there's representatives from every council along that way on this WEHAC committee. So there is a really strong representation. And again, it goes back to Pyrenees on your own, trying to represent. Your voice is not as well heard as it is with the whole conglomerate of councils representing and advocating for things to happen. And especially now, it's never been more so important with the state of the Western Highway, which everybody agrees that, you know, it's a pretty poor condition. So it's really, really important that we have that strong advocacy to get some things happening with that highway space. And just an example, a quick example of the importance of what the work that committee does through Mr. Gowns and myself. They strongly advocated for the traffic safety camera at the intersection of Lawrence Street and Neil Street, and that is actually happening as we speak, and it's coming to fruition. And so that certainly has happened a lot quicker because of that advocacy and the strength of advocacy from that committee. So that just highlights the importance of what that work, the important work that committee can do and what they can achieve as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Ferrari. Councillor Vance?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add that the subscription rate too is very affordable, which is. But away from that, I've got to reiterate Councillor Ferrari's remarks. They've been great advocates for a long time. They have contacts not only with the state government, but with the federal government also. And the importance of the bypass of Beaufort is getting one day closer every day. We see the sun go down. So eventually it's going to happen. And to be able to have advocates that are strong with the government on the introduction of that bypass is very important.
Thank you, councillor Vance. Any other discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. Essential Services Commission, local government data. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide details on the Essential Services Commission Council fact sheets on the outcomes of rate capping. And that's the title that's applied by the Essential Services Commission. And the key driver for bringing this to council's attention through our council report is to demonstrate transparency to the community about how council raises its rates and where that rate money is spent. And that's fundamentally the business of council in terms of providing services to the community. And the breakdown of those services into the categories that are outlined by the Essential Services Commission are contained in this report. And it provides a side-by-side comparison with 19 other small rural council average for each of those items. And just a couple of highlights to note there, Mr. Mayor, is that from a rates and charges perspective, 45% of council's revenue is generated through rates and charges, whereas 50% of it is from government grants. And the other comparisons are there for any observations to be made. And so, Mr. Mayor, part of the reason why this is also brought to council's attention is that ordinarily council reports its performance data in a public way through the local government performance reporting, and currently the website for the reporting of that data is not fully operational from a local government Victoria perspective, and so this in some way sort of provides some further data to make it available to the community. And that local government performance reporting we expect will be which we provide data to that process on an annual basis, but it's about improving the access to that data for members of the public, and it's expected that that data will be available to members of the public in coming months. So, Mr. Mayor, I just put this report and recommend that council note the data contained and look to use the data in future community engagement and for financial service planning where appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we have a motion. Councillor Clark moved, seconded. Councillor Keogh. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is a very valuable little report for councillors and for the community. I think particularly the thing that, and it really shows that we are at the smaller end of the small councils. in the context of our revenue, but certainly the last part of the table that talks about where we spend our money, I think it's really good to see that we are pretty much in the same boat as most of the other councils. The one, Mr. Nolan, that triggered my interest was contributions and other in the revenue, the last line in the revenue, where we get about 1% of our revenue from other sources, whereas the average for the sector is actually 5%. Could we follow up with the Essential Services Commission on whether we can get a bit of an inkling, and it may be just simply someone's declaring renewable energy income in that other rather than rates and charges, but we've often talked about are there other options for councils to raise money. I think that's one that's worth following up with to see if we can get any further information.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Happy to get some more information on that and share it with councillors. And if there's some other sources of income out there that we're not aware of, then certainly give us another avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Keogh? No. Any other councillors? Councillor Vance?
Yeah, it's very pleasing for me to see that even though we're down with the smaller councils, we're still punching above our weight. Our staff and contributors should be very proud of the fact that we can hold our heads up and say that we are performing well, even though the public might not realise just how well we are performing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. We have a recommendation, councillors. All those in favour? Carried. Legislative reform impacting the local government sector. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to bring to council's attention some of the more recent legislative reform that's underway that is impacting on local government and some of the services that we provide. And so I've outlined 4 specific areas there, Mr. Mayor. The first relates to the circular economy, and for every member of our community that receives waste services, this item is relevant. And so I've outlined there some information in respect of the Circular Economy Act 2021, which has a number of mandatory provisions for councils to implement. And one of those mandatory provisions relates to the collection of curbside waste. And why this is relevant at this point in time, Mr. Mayor, is that there are currently regulations that relate to that act that are under development, and the Recycling Victoria currently has those new regulations on its website, on the Victorian Engage website, and comments are sought on those at the moment. So that's a really relevant piece of legislation and relevant regulations and standards for council to consider. And some of these regulations and standards will ultimately influence the services that council will provide to the community, which will be mandatory for council, and also thereby affect the cost to individuals for the service. So it's important for us to pay attention to this legislative change and to work as a sector to ensure the best outcomes for the community. Obviously, the intent of this act is to ensure that the community collectively uses the resource that we have in the best way that we can and minimise our waste. The building control, Mr. Mayor, the Building Act has a number of provisions that council has responsibility for through our municipal building surveyor, and a recent Supreme Court decision identified some significant limitations to the powers of the municipal building surveyor in respect of issuing of notices for and orders for minor works, and that's a matter that's currently under discussion in the sector, but it's certainly one that now has had an impact on the functions and the activities of our building surveyors. There's significant amount of planning reform currently underway, and Of course, planning is quite a complex area of activity, and council is the responsible authority for the Pyrenees planning scheme. So we have a central role in planning for our shire and our communities. The reform that's currently underway is looking to modernise the system and meet current development pressures, particularly relating to population growth, the demand for housing and energy. And of course, it's really important to ensure that these reforms in planning don't create inappropriate negative consequences for our communities, and that they reflect good planning and maximise the benefits for our community ongoing, and also have relevance to small rural councils and the capacity of councils to implement. The Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Amendment Bill is a bill before Parliament currently, and this bill looks to amend the provisions that relate to the Extractive Industries Act and the extractive industries and quarrying activity. And there are a number of quarrying activities within our shire which fit within council's responsibility as the responsible authority for the planning scheme, where these activities require planning approval. Currently, those activities within the quarry itself, which are operational, fit within a work authority, and that work authority is issued by Earth Resources, a state entity. Under these new provisions, there is a proposal for work authorities to be removed and responsibility to revert back to the operator themselves to undertake appropriate risks and risk mitigation. And there is some concern that this legislation may change council's responsibility in some way when it comes to the implementation of this new legislation. So whilst, Mr Mayor, I've not undertaken a detailed analysis of the bill before Parliament, the purpose of raising this with councillors at the moment is to demonstrate that there is a significant area of interest there that we need to pay attention to. Mr Mayor, it's not an exhaustive list, and even just within the last week, there have been some other provisions. The ministerial guidelines have been released relating to the payment of rates and charges. And in these ministerial guidelines, there are provisions that define hardship and policies and circumstances where hardship would apply when processing rate payments. The process for development of payment plans for people that are in hardship in terms of paying their rates, addressing the waiver of interest on unpaid rates. So these are matters that are important to all our ratepayers, and these are new ministerial guidelines that the council will be required to abide by once they're implemented. And right at the moment, these guidelines are currently on the engagement hub, and the government is seeking feedback on these. The other one that I'll make reference to is the local government rates valuation averaging mechanism. So this is a mechanism for establishing a valuation to be applied when calculating the rates for individual properties. And that has currently been prepared and is on the Victorian Government Engagement Hub, with feedback due on the 31st of August. So, Mr Mayor, this legislation is currently under review, and these are only examples of it. There's evidence that there's a lot of work to be done by the sector and individually by councils to continue to pay attention and have input into this legislation where the opportunity arises. And as a small rural council, it's almost impossible for us to be abreast of all of this, and that's why it's really important for us to have partnerships and membership with other peak agencies. And that's why, Mr Mayor, I've recommended here that council continues to work with peak bodies, including the Municipal Association of Victoria, to ensure appropriate scrutiny and advocacy on key legislative reform proposals, including those outlined in this report. and that council receives a further report on the circular economy reforms at a future council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Moved Councillor Vance, seconded Councillor Keogh. Councillor Vance.
Yeah, we've had a great deal of information placed before us, and how much we understand at this very moment is difficult to comprehend. I agree, the MAB being our peak body, the lead, hopefully the lead agency when we start reviewing all this, and down the track we'll have some further idea, but certainly happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Keogh.
Only just to second that, and also to realise that we really need to be abreast of all these reforms and legislative demands that are placed upon us as local government. So all the support that we can get is wise and prudent. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just one that I do want to make some comment on, and I've been around this table for a little while, and I reckon in the case of extractive industries, mineral resources, I reckon I've seen probably 4 different quarry applications over that 20 odd years. So you don't see them very often here, but when you do, they're quite detailed, and you always have a really significant amount of community interest in them. That what's proposed, as we understand it, to take away the work plan. So effectively what happened previously was that we got a work plan that was approved by the subject matter experts, being the State Department. And on that basis, we would then go ahead and issue a permit. But that very much informed council about what the decision was, because you knew what the operator was going to do because it was detailed in the plan. The proposal to remove that, I think, is going to make it very difficult for councillors to feel they're making a good decision, particularly when these issues normally raise a significant amount of community interest. And I think the most recent one, we certainly had the quarry out at Stockyard Hill, but the one before that I remember in my patch was Black Bottom Road, which was probably about 6 or 8 years ago, and there was significant community interest. It's really hard to make good decisions when you don't have the right information, which is potentially the risk we have.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I recall the Black Bottom Road decision, and yes, without that work plan, I don't know how council would have made the correct decision on that one. Those work plans give us an awful lot of information. Any other discussion, councillors? All those in favour? Carried. Road management, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide information not just to council but to the community on responsibilities and undertake community engagement on aspects of road management and maintenance. Council's biggest expenditure function is the maintenance and construction of its local road network, and depending on the level of capital expenditure in any year, council could spend between 25 and 40% of its annual budget directly on road assets. And council's network comprises over 2,000 kilometres of sealed and unsealed roads. The Road Management Act and associated regulations and codes provide the legal framework for council's asset management plan and our road management plan, which sets the regime and the service standards that council uses to undertake that work. Council's local road network is part of a total road network that provides transport links for public access to property, places, and for the transportation of goods. Council engages an independent assessor to assess the condition of our assets every 4 years, and this assessment is used to inform decisions about council's annual renewal and capital improvement program. Funding for the various maintenance and renewal programs is primarily through rates and Commonwealth funding, including the federal assistance grants, Roads to Recovery program, and specific funding such as the Local Road and Community Infrastructure Fund, or the Bridges Renewal Program, or the Black Spot Program, or Natural Disaster Recovery funding arrangements. The Victorian Government, through the Department of Transport and Planning, is responsible for the management and maintenance of the freeway and arterial road network, listed in the Vic Roads Register of Public Roads. And Mr Mayor, part of the purpose of bringing this report to the community's attention is because there is ongoing confusion in the community often about where council's responsibilities start and where the Department of Transport responsibilities are. So in summary, the Department of Transport is responsible for the maintenance and upgrade and the management of some significant roads within our shire, and they include the Western Highway, the Sunraysia Highway, the Glenelg Highway, the Pyrenees Highway, and a number of other arterial routes, which include the Beaufort Skipton Road, the Beaufort Lexton Road, the Ballarat Carnham Road, the Lexton Talbot Road, the Stall of Oka Road, the Ararat St Arnaud Road, and the Maryborough St Arnaud Road. So these are all roads that are considered arterial roads under the responsibility of the state through the Department of Treasury, Transport and Planning. And council has no authority to undertake works on those roads unless with the approval of the department. In urban areas, there is a code of practice. I think it's a code of practice called the Operational Responsibility for Public Roads, and it's accessible on the website, which will articulate the specific limitations of responsibility between the department and council on those arterial roads in urban environments. So essentially between the 80k limits of each of the townships where council has the capacity to be able to undertake things like footpath maintenance and footpath works. So the footpaths and some parking areas, tree planting and some landscaping and so forth in those urban areas, and within towns like Avoca, the central median, where there are a number of council assets. Council has authority to be able to undertake those works within the township areas, but through those township areas, the pavement on those roads are the responsibility of the road authority, which is the Department of Transport. Mr Mayor, regularly we get comments from the community about, can council do something about this road or that road? And more often than not, the comments that come through actually relate to the arterial road network. So, Mr Mayor, that's not to say that the community are not interested in the local road network. We receive a lot of requests for works on our local road network, and it's a major effort of council and a major responsibility that council has. And Mr Mayor, as a result of this report, the recommendation is that council continues to inform the community through various means about its local road management and its maintenance activities. And secondly, the council undertakes some targeted engagement across the Shire on the management and maintenance of council's sealed and unsealed road network.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. We have a recommendation, councillors. Do I have a mover? Moved Councillor Keogh, seconded Councillor Clark. Councillor Keogh.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, this is such an important part of what we do, and to be able to improve that service and how we maintain our road network, which is over 2,000 kilometres of sealed and unsealed road, is really important. I'm particularly keen to start undertaking those targeted engagement sessions. I think that's a really prudent way and a good way to get across our Shire and really understand how we can best utilise those funds, both our Shire funds and also those government grants that we rely on to be able to maintain and continue to improve our network. So thank you.
Councillor Clark? No. In addition to this information on roads and maintenance and so forth, I think we could also add an explanation of funding for natural disasters. People don't necessarily understand where the money comes from and how it gets to us and why there are delays in that process. So adding that in may be very fortuitous for our community. Councillors, all those in favour? Carried. Do you need a breather, Mr Nolan?
Not at all, Mr Mayor. We're on the home straight.
Operation Sandon, Mr Nolan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is really to bring to the community and council's attention about the IBAC report titled Operation Sandon. The report is an investigation into allegations of corrupt conduct involving councillors and property developers in Melbourne's southeast. The report also examines the effectiveness of Victoria's systems of control for safeguarding the integrity of the state's planning processes. The full report is available to the community online. At the outset, it's clear that the report has been provided to councillors, and councillors have had the opportunity to consider a range of issues identified in the report. In summary, there are 34 recommendations, and these recommendations include that an interdepartmental task force be established to be responsible for, among other things, the implementation of the recommendations, that changes to the planning processes, including the development of an independent planning panels for significant planning matters, be established, changes to the recruitment and employment of the council CEOs to give greater consistency and independent oversight, and that the Minister for Local Government develop and maintain a model code of conduct and model governance rules, including better practice provisions to apply to all councils. That's a summary of the 34 recommendations. The report was tabled in the Victorian Parliament, and the government will need to consider that and provide a response. It is ordinary practice, Mr Mayor, when there are inquiries and investigations like this within the sector, that they're given consideration at an individual council level to see if there are any provisions or any measures that council needs to take in response to those issues that are identified. And ordinarily, we would also report this to council's Audit and Risk Committee to consider, and the Audit and Risk Committee provides advice to council about our processes, our risks, and our operations. So, Mr Mayor, I simply recommend that council refers the Operation Sandon report and its recommendation to council's Audit and Risk Committee for consideration, and that council continues to engage with the sector and relevant oversight agencies to develop and implement appropriate measures and controls to mitigate future corruption risks in the sector.
Thank you, Mr Nolan. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The City of Casey might be a long way away, but it impacts us all in the small state of Victoria. And while I don't think we need to get too concerned about the planning stuff here at Pyrenees, given that we've just seen in Ms Brownell's report that we've got a 97% delivery rate of things on time, on budget, which is good. I think it's some of the governance ones that I think are interesting for us. And I think certainly one of the things the report highlights very much is consistency across councils rather than conformity, and we do need to work with that with some guidelines from the state. It also talks about political donations, which I think is not really a big issue in Pyrenees. I don't think I've had one yet. But again, we need to make sure those rules are in place. And I think the other one I think is just interesting is that today, as we do at least twice a month, we have a briefing as councillors on issues around us, not so much just about what's at the council meeting, but what else is happening in our patch, what projects council's working on. And that's a really critical part of us understanding what council's doing, and we need to make sure we've got the right guidelines around that. So yes, plenty of work to do, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Ferrari? No? Any other councillors? No, I agree, Councillor Clark. We have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, because of the malfeasance of other people in the sector, it makes us all look bad when it's only a very small minority of people that are doing it. Councillors, all those in favour? Carried. Councillor reports and general business. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Earlier in the month, I attended Rural Councils Forum in Echuca. I was very proud of the fact that our CEO had the opportunity to present to the forum on the Correa Park expose that council took on and completed. It really created a lot of interest in the forum. I'm very proud to say. A lot of people came up to me and were asking questions on how we started it, how we progressed it and went through. So well done, Mr. CEO, you performed very well. Prior to the actual forum, the evening before, we had the opportunity to go and inspect the wharf at Echuca. And you just cannot imagine, I can imagine the amount of force that water carries, because it carried the Titanic and it was a fairly large boat, wasn't it? It wasn't a rowboat. But the water's got to within 2 inches of the highest ever recorded in history at Echuca. The water was actually, when the Campaspe River met the Murray, the water was flowing back up the Murray. It changed direction and pushed it back up the river. It isolated paddle boats in little areas off to the side of the river where they were still sitting there when we were there. I'm not sure how they're going to get them out. They've got a job ahead of them in that regard. But it was very interesting just to see the enormity of the amount of water that was coming down those rivers in a month, in some, or 3 weeks after the actual rain event. Took that long to get down. Where we reside here in the Pyrenees, we're fortunate in one aspect. When the rain falls heavy, but it gets away quick, creates the floods that finish further afield. I've had 2 meetings, virtual meetings at Timber Towns at a position paper meeting, which they've put together now. That has been completed. I didn't actually physically attend the meeting in Melbourne. I done it virtually. It was interesting to know that the decision of the government to close all our forests to hardwood timber selection now has created extreme hardship to Gippsland and all their timber towns down there. I gather we have one timber mill here in Beaufort, which is still important to the community. It employs, as I understand, 7 people. And when they run out of timber shortly, they're going to close their mill. But down in Gippsland, towns like Swifts Creek, and Orbost, there's whole towns of timber working families that are out of job. They're going to become welfare towns. And that's a pretty hard pill to swallow for those people. I really do feel sorry for them. Our RCV meeting, the one thing that I was unable to get into the meeting for quite a while because my laptop decided to upgrade itself at the very start of the meeting, but freedom of information requests that are coming forward to small rural councils is creating quite a deal of hardship. That's something that's going to be pursued by our executive. And as one would understand, when you're required to provide this information, it takes people away from other jobs that they're doing in the business. So it's a bit frustrating. I attended the cuppa at Raglan. We had quite a good attendance there and got home at a reasonable time, which was good. I wish to thank the outdoor staff and contractors for the work that they've done on our flood damage. It took a long time to get around to it, but as people don't understand, we've got to get all the approvals from up above before we get the funding to do it. And finally, I wish to let other councillors know, if they didn't, that Wal Henning passed away 10 days ago and was buried at Mount Cole last Thursday. I thank Robert John for letting me know that it happened. I went along to the funeral. There were very few people there. That was his wish. A man that was the pioneer of our viticulture industry in the top end of the Shire. And a character in his own right. It was disappointing to see 20 people there to say goodbye to Wally. But anyway, that's my lot, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Vance. Councillor Keogh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to just start to remind residents, because by the time we meet again, our community funding program will be open. So the applications for those will open on Friday, the 8th of September, and they'll close again on Monday, the 23rd of October. But those of you interested will probably want to start preparing for them as soon as possible. So these funds, of course, council is committed to supporting local community groups, organisations and businesses to deliver projects and activities that help our whole Shire. So those grants are offered in regards to events, projects, equipment, minor capital works and one-off programs and activities. So you can get that information off the website, and I encourage you really to make the most of those grants. Our latest community cuppa was actually at the Lake Goldsmith Hall last week, and their residents raised a lot of essential concerns, and in particular regarding road maintenance and the rating system. So we had a lot of valuable discussion there, and we thank those people who were there and really looking at issues like prioritising effective grading practices to protect our roads, looking at drainage practices, how we can better protect our roads, that sort of thing. So that was really important. Just to reiterate what happened tonight, obviously in the meeting, being committed to running those engagement sessions in order to improve that, I think is such an important thing across the Shire. So again, really important. Just on roads as well, obviously with the time of the year and the weather conditions, do be very careful on the roads, and please always drive to the conditions. But just note with weather and water impacts on roads, and adding to that ice, for instance, this week it's been a very icy few mornings, and also livestock and wild stock that get out on the road. So please do be very careful. I would like to finish too on another sadder note, but a joyful note in remembering an incredible fellow. We had the passing of Clive Drinkwater, who is actually a council worker for many, many years, and was affectionately known in the Snake Valley area as the Mayor of Morchip. But he will be greatly missed by many community members. Again, someone who did so much for the community and in his own small way, but also in greater ways, being someone that people could go to seek advice on many council matters as well as other matters. So condolences to his beautiful wife, Joan, and his family and friends. So I think the church will actually be packed at Snake Valley when that funeral is, when that has been decided. But he was certainly a community man, and as his whole family are, very involved in community matters around Snake Valley, and particularly the football club and a few other organisations and committees around that area. So we also remember him, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Keogh. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To attend the councillor couples and chats, Raglan and at
Lake Goldsmith.
And I just note again, as I say most meetings, but they are better represented by the community because we're having them in the evenings when people have got the ability to attend. So that was a really good decision to change that. I've had a number of discussions with some groups around Beaufort, including some of the Lake Goldsmith steam rally. They've got a lot happening and some big events coming up, so no doubt those discussions will be ongoing. And as we know, they're very passionate about their little area out there. And then, of course, it's not just a local venue. It's when they have their events, they're nationally and internationally recognised and attended. So it is a really important part of our local economy and events calendar. Some some discussions with some of the committee of the Beaufort Scramble track. And even I probably wasn't aware, but I was told today, as recent as today, that not too long ago, they had up to 130 participants riding around on the scramble track out in the Lexington Road. So that's obviously really taken off again, and it's great to see that it's getting that amount of use out there. So that's really, really fantastic. And congratulations to the people involved who are running it and organising it, because it would take a lot of getting up and make sure those events not only run properly, but they're safe. So that's really, really fantastic. Had some discussions with the Beaufort Cricket Club and the Beaufort Football Club over a number of matters. And I'd just like to say in closing that, or about to close, that the cricket nets are well underway and not far from completion. So that's really good to see after we've had some delays, and they'll certainly be in use before the cricket season commences. The public toilets around in the main street there, they're certainly well underway. As with a lot of these projects, when you start doing something, you find something else along the way. So there has been some little delays, but my understanding is that they should be up and going within the next fortnight or so. And if not, we'll certainly keep the community, local community involved or informed. The lake foreshore infrastructure is up on the foreshore up at the lake. It's ongoing and it's coming along really nice. And I'm sure with a few other little additions that's going to come up, and that's going to be just an absolutely fantastic area for the community, for singular attention or for social events, and that's really fantastic. And the football club mentioned about some issues with some lights up there. And we did have a look at it. It was going to be very, very expensive to fix them. And we took that into consideration, but there's new lights due to going, which the works on that will commence basically straight after the season finishes and when the ground dries a little bit. So hopefully, certainly I was thinking by the start of the next football season, those new lights will be up and that'll be a fantastic asset for them up there. And just in closing, I wasn't aware of Ozzie Henning's passing either until Councillor Vance mentioned. I didn't know Ozzie well. He lived in Beaufort here for many, many years, and he was a character and a larrikin in some aspects, but also he's clearly very clever and a visionary, especially within that viticulture, sector up there. And probably, as Councillor Vance alluded to, is probably one of the pioneers of starting all that up there, and look where it is now. So, Vale Ozzie. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like the other councillors, I attended the councillor couples at Raglan and at Lake Goldsmith, which were both well attended and really good positive discussions. I've had a number of constituent meetings in Raglan, in Warburg and in Lexington over the last month. I, like Councillor Vance, attended the RCB forum, which was a really excellent day, and I'd just like to commend Councillor Vance as an executive member of Rural Councils Victoria for his part in helping organise that event. With my MAV hat on, I had the privilege to go over to Trentham, to our neighbouring shire, Hepburn, to attend their positive ageing forum. They had about 120 people there on a very lovely winter's day. So that was a really, really good event in that sense of things. Otherwise, locally, it's the last round of Central Highlands Footy League this weekend. I'm not sure any of our three teams, Carnham, Linton, Beaufort or Warburg, are going to go particularly deep in the finals this year. But it's been a good season and we've got through it. And our ovals, particularly given how wet it was back in June and July, have held up pretty well really through that. In terms of some local news, obviously Naganook Wind Farm, there's information sessions, I think, in Evansford and in Clunes this week and in Warburg early next week for anyone that has an interest in that project, which kind of comes from Evansford back across Mount Bolton, that area. So please come and have a discussion with the people from Acciona around that. And the final one is I've just received notice today, and I'm reading here directly from the AusNet website in relation to the Western Renewables link, that AusNet has referred the project, so this is the Western Renewables link transmission line, in its current proposed form to the Minister for Planning for a new decision on the assessment requirements under the Environmental Effects Act. So in effect, AusNet are asking the Minister to determine whether or not a new environmental effects statement is required for the line. And in terms of the context to that they give, they basically talk about the fact that the Sydenham Terminal Station is now not part of the project. Obviously, that in our patch, that what was a 220 kV line from Bulgana through to Mount Prospect to Newland has now been upgraded to 500. The fact the Mount Prospect terminal station has now been taken out, and that there will be a new terminal station at Bulgana and the things they talk about. There's not much other detail on the website at this point in time. So all I can kind of take from that for community reference really is this will most likely extend the planning time of the project. And as council gets more information, I'm sure we'll share that with the community. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I attended the local mayor's meeting in Ballarat, where we have discussed issues of a more regional nature. I too attended the Rural Council's Victoria Forum in Echuca and congratulate Councillor Vance on running a very informative day. And publicly, I'd like to congratulate Mr. Nolan on his presentation to the forum. I think it put our abilities as a shire in front of everybody that was there, and a lot of people were talking about it after they'd heard his presentation. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. And that's all from me. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching our meeting tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. We will close the meeting at 7:36 p.m. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.